It is Thanksgiving week in the NFL and in America as well, which means we are getting much closer to fantasy playoff time. Hopefully, you guys are already locked into a playoff spot, but if not, we're still going to do our best to help you get there. I'm John Macri, joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst Nathan Jahnke, and for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over the top waiver wire targets heading into Week 13. Nate, happy early Thanksgiving to you, and how are you heading into this big week of football?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It already feels like the playoffs in a lot of leagues. The Scott Fish Bowl already had one round of the playoffs. Those of you who tried out guillotine leagues this year, it's really starting to get close to the end there if you've survived this far like I have in my league. So it's been interesting times. We've got a fun list of players for the waiver wire this week. Luckily, not quite as many injuries as we've seen in the past few weeks, so that makes it a little bit more difficult to find some names off the waiver wire, but I do think there are at least a few at each position that is interesting for these last 5 weeks of the fantasy season.
For sure. Yeah. Look, there's always injuries every single week. So we're always looking to, add some depth, add some replacements, hopefully get over the line here into the fantasy football playoffs, and then hope to go on a little bit of a run. And we're going to go over some names that could maybe help you do that this week. And as always, we'll be going through all of the names on Nate's waiver wire article list here. But if you do want to get access to the written version of that article, you can do so with a PFF Plus subscription. And right now, if you use the promo code Black Friday, you get 40% off a PFF Plus subscription, which is huge. Again, we talked about this last week, but not just another sale. It is your edge for the rest of the season, really, right? Every NFL and college team uses PFF data, and you can as well for 40% off. This Black Friday, it'll be just $5.99 a month for a PFF Plus subscription. That'll get you access through the entire year, including NFL draft season, all of that great stuff in there. Not like I said, not just this for the fantasy playoffs, but or fantasy football playoffs, but for NFL playoffs and for NFL draft season as well. So whether you're researching bets, setting lineups, sitting in the GM seat on draft day, just want to go beyond the box score, you can do it all. This is our biggest discount of the year. And like we keep saying, if you are contending right now in your fantasy league, you're looking to make that push for a championship, you haven't maybe subscribed yet, this is kind of the move to put you over the top here in your fantasy leagues, give you that edge, and bring home a fantasy football championship. So don't wait. Use code Black Friday at subscribe.pff.com for 40% off a PFF Plus subscription. All right, let's get into our waiver wire targets here, Nate, and we're going to start with the quarterbacks this week because, like we were saying, the league is essentially 90% backup quarterbacks at this point. It feels like we just lost Baker Mayfield as our casualty of the week, though it seems like he has a chance to play this week. But yeah, anyways, we're going to start with Jacoby Brissett, who is leading us off here, really close to that rostership threshold here at 50%. And considering I think the need for quarterbacks from so many rosters right now, he might not be eligible for this list next week. So go get him now, Nate.
Yeah, I'm going to miss talking about Joe Flacco at this point every week, but I don't think we'll be doing that again this season. But Brissett is now our new top quarterback, at least for the 1 week, like you said. He has been playing very well since becoming the Cardinals starter. He has scored at least 18 fantasy points in each of his past 6 games. No other fantasy quarterback has been able to do that past their last 3 games. So he has been more consistent than any other quarterback, whether they're on the waivers or not. His rostership has been consistently going up each and every week, so I doubt we're talking about him here next week. But the Cardinals, outside of just how well he's playing, faces the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week. They've allowed the eighth most fantasy points to quarterbacks so far this season. Also have a pretty favorable schedule. It's up and down throughout the rest of the season, but last week of the fantasy season, they faced the Cincinnati Bengals, who have allowed a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Brissett at least can be an option for this week, can be an option during the fantasy championship week. And if you are stuck and just need a quarterback in general, he can be fine, even if the matchups aren't ideal throughout the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, he's been great. Like I know only one passing touchdown this week, but once again delivered high yardage totals, right? 317 passing yards. So he's averaging like over 314 passing yards per game this season. He's had 50 dropbacks in 3 straight games, which of course has naturally led him to the most dropbacks over the last 3 weeks, 168, which is nearly 30 more than the next closest quarterback. So he's been a passing volume monster, if nothing else, which we'll absolutely take for fantasy purposes. Even if, the results are mediocre for NFL returns, it doesn't really matter since the Cardinals, they've obviously lost all 3 games, but we care less about that for fantasy when he's passing the ball a ton and putting up that kind of yardage there. So love that for Brissett. Now, speaking of players, I guess who have been at least a little better for fantasy than NFL, Trevor Lawrence continues his roller coaster season, delivered 3 passing touchdowns this past week, which is as many as he's had over the previous 4 games combined, but could be a fine option for teams in need here, Nate.
Yeah, and outside of the touchdowns, he has been getting plenty of yards recently, has averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game since week 6. So even though he hasn't had Brian Thomas Jr. for the past couple weeks, haven't had Travis Hunter for a while, has still been producing as a passer, which has been great to see. 17.7, that's 14th best, so not quite what you want to see out of a fantasy starter, but with plenty of other quarterbacks injured at this point of the year, he could be the best option, especially if Jacoby Brissett isn't there. Just even though the schedule isn't ideal when you compare him to all the other quarterbacks who are available on the waiver wire, I'd still rather have Lawrence with his less than ideal schedule than some of the other quarterbacks who do have a better schedule over the rest of the season. Because like you said, there are a lot of backup quarterbacks playing right now, and most of them are players that you don't want in your fantasy starting lineup. So Jacksonville faces the Titans, the Colts twice, the Jets, and the Broncos. So some games where you probably don't want him in your lineup, but especially the Colts are an interesting team in general since they've typically been winning games, so teams have to pass a lot against them. Even though they have a decent secondary, teams are still getting a lot of volume against them, and that's what Lawrence has been doing, is getting a lot of volume. So Lawrence is the best option if Jacoby Brissett's not available for you.
Yeah, it makes sense. And look, 3 rushing touchdowns over his last 4 games as well, which has helped. And obviously, like you said, the volume is key, as was the case with Brissett, right? Like he's a frustrating NFL quarterback to watch. I understand he doesn't have his top wide receivers, but even with BTJ in the lineup, it's still been a little bit frustrating, but he's at least been usable for fantasy. So worth a shot here if you're in one of those desperate spots for a quarterback this week and for the next few weeks potentially. So we also have rookie New Orleans Saints quarterback Tyler Shuck on the list this week. He's becoming slightly more productive recently, Nate.
Yeah, this is more specifically for those deeper leagues where if you've lost a quarterback recently and are in need of someone and you're debating against him and some backup quarterback, or those are the kind of options you're looking at. I think Tyler could have a decent week this week. Has been getting a little more productive, at least 240 receiving yards in each of the last 2 games. He's been running the ball a little bit more often, which is good to see. And with Alvin Kamara injured, they could be relying more on the passing game in the next couple weeks as well. Specifically, this upcoming week faces the Miami Dolphins. They've allowed the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So not the ideal option at quarterback in general. If you have a quarterback and have been decently happy with one, then you shouldn't be considering anyone on this list outside of Jacoby Brissett. But if you're in one of these 12, 14 team leagues where you had Baker Mayfield and maybe like a Tyrod Taylor as your backup option, then Tyler is someone who can be in your starting lineup this week.
Yeah, makes sense. No touchdowns this week, but it was a tougher matchup against a pretty solid Atlanta defense. Like you said, Miami has certainly been a better matchup. So while he didn't throw any touchdowns this past week, there's at least a pretty good likelihood for him to improve if you're in need of a quarterback streamer in week 13. All right, Nate, last quarterback on the waiver target list here is Washington Commanders backup quarterback Marcus Mariota. It sounds like Jane Daniels will not play this week. He has a chance to return after that, but at least another game's worth of potential viability here for fantasy for Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, my mindset here is to pick him up and stash him on your bench just in case Jaden Daniels doesn't come back, because it does sound like Daniels will be practicing a little bit this week to get him ready to play, but Washington might also be at a point where they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. Maybe they decide they don't want to risk having Daniels back, or he has a setback in practice. Any of those things could happen. So in that case, the Commanders do have the 3rd best schedule for quarterbacks during the fantasy playoffs. They face their 3 division rivals, which includes the Giants and Cowboys, 2 of the top teams at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Eagles, not as good of a matchup, but still a decent enough matchups. So I think if Mariota remains the quarterback for Washington throughout the rest of the season, he could have some pretty big games in the fantasy playoffs. So if you're one of these teams that you've had injuries at quarterback, have been constantly switching through players, I would be stashing Mariota on your bench just in case. And there's a chance he could have some pretty big games in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense for Washington to just stick with Mariota at this point in the season than risk bringing Jaden Daniels back and getting injured again. Like the team is what 3-8, I think right now, right? So they're not going to do anything with this season. I don't know why you would risk it. So yeah, it makes sense that we just, again, just holding Mariota here. Potentially the team, comes to their senses and just lets him finish out the year. But we'll see what happens with the Commanders and their quarterback situation. But let's go on to the running backs now. And I mean, look, maybe not the most attractive running back options this week, but we're heading into week 13 at this point in the season. What do you expect, right? To be fair, kicking us off this week is typically or technically a lead running back for those Washington Commanders right now, and that is Chris Rodriguez Jr. Nate.
Yeah, I think he's pretty well flying under the radar because he has been their clear starter the past 2 weeks. In that first week where he was a clear starter, he had an injury, so the box score did not make it look like he was a clear starter. His game, most recently, he ran the ball 15 times for 79 yards, averaged 4.7 yards per carry, was pretty clearly ahead of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in that game. The only problem is Washington had their bye week last week, so no one was picking him up because they weren't going to be able to use him right away. But now he should be Washington's lead running back over the rest of the season, should be seeing double-digit carries at the very least, has the opportunity to get 15 to 20 carries in games where Washington is potentially winning, and Washington has one of the best schedules for running backs over the rest of the way. I mentioned those games against the Giants and Cowboys. They've been allowing plenty both in the run game and the pass game this year. So I think there are going to be opportunities for Rodriguez to have some pretty big fantasy performances. Not going to have a ton in the receiving game, so I don't think he's going to be like a top 10, top 12 running back anytime soon, but I do think there will be games where he's worthy of being an RB2 over the rest of the season.
Yeah. And yeah, we talked about it last week, right? Like at this point in the year, being able to find a lead running back on waivers is a rarity, right? So assuming that role holds, like you said, he should definitely get up over that 50% rostership mark at the very least here. So now next up, a player who we've had on the list for a while now, at least since Kendrick Miller went to IR, rookie Devin Neal, whose role should probably grow substantially if Alvin Kamara's knee injury keeps him out of games going forward, as it did in week 12.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara suffered an MCL strain, so that should keep him out, I would guess, for a couple of weeks. It depends on the severity of the strain, and we don't know what the severity is. So a small chance Kamara is able to play this week, a chance that Kamara doesn't return at any point this season, or it could be anywhere in between. So at least for the short term, I would expect Devin Neal to be the starting running back for the Saints. He was the only other running back active for the Saints last week. So once Kamara went down, he took all of the running back snaps outside of somewhere Taysom Hill was on the field. And the one thing to note is Taysom Hill did run the ball more than Neal after Kamara's injury. So that isn't quite ideal. And then they will at least have one other running back active on game days going forward. Audric Estime is on the roster and could be the backup running back. They did recently re-sign Velus Jones to the practice squad, and he had been on and off the practice squad throughout the season, so a chance he could be the backup running back, and especially playing on some passing situations. But we'll see how the Saints deal with things, but I expect Neal to be getting at least close to double-digit carries going forward, if not more than that. Depends how much they want to keep using Taysom Hill. Hill hasn't really been all that effective on his runs this season, but Neal should be the starter, and the Saints do have a pretty decent schedule for running backs the rest of the way.
Yeah, and like you said, he was the only running back other than Kamara active, and he's been the only other running back right now that's healthy for the Saints to have taken any carries with the team this year with Miller and Kamara injured. So, yeah, Taysom Hill, I'm sure is going to get more touches, and spoilers, we'll talk about him later. But as far as running backs go, Neal makes sense to lead the way for as long as Kamara is out. All right, we got another running back injury this past week, and it was a big one. Ashton Jeanty suffering an ankle injury late in the game, so we'll see how long he's out, if at all. But there's likely more work here for Raheem Mostert ahead if Jeanty misses more time. But you've also included Zamir White on the list, Nate.
Yeah, so Jeanty, it's an ankle injury. All we've heard so far is that it's not severe, which is something we've heard a lot whenever there's an injury that's not season ending, but that doesn't really give a great sense of how long Jeanty might be out. A chance he plays this week, a chance he misses basically the rest of the fantasy season because there's only 5 more weeks of the fantasy season. So with that, we would turn to a Raiders backup running back. And this is me speculating a little bit, having Zamir White here instead of Raheem Mostert. Over the past several weeks, it's been Raheem Mostert as the backup. His primary role has been a third down back. He was a receiving back in his last year in Miami, and Zamir White has not been a receiving back. So that could play into Raheem Mostert being the backup over the past few weeks. Dylan Labe has been the third running back, but that's mostly because of what he can do on special teams. We have seen plenty of times that a practice squad running back is really ahead of a running back who's actually on the roster because of special teams work. So I would expect Zamir White at a bare minimum to be active if Jeanty misses time. But also Chip Kelly just got fired from the Raiders. Raheem Mostert and Chip Kelly had a strong relationship that dated back to their time with the 49ers, the time with the Eagles. I believe that's a big reason why Mostert was on the team at all, was because Chip Kelly was there, and now Chip Kelly is no longer their offensive coordinator. So if we're going to get a timeshare between White and Mostert, it makes sense to me to have White to be the early down back and Mostert to be the receiving back, which is where those players play their best, in which case White would be the more fantasy relevant running back of the two. So we'll see what happens with Jeanty's injury, how long he might be out. Wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are picking up Mostert rather than White. So I think White is someone who can pretty well fly under the radar over the next couple of days. So if you need to get a running back, haven't left yourself much free agent budget, White is probably a pretty good option that you can be picking up right now.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, I mean, as if things couldn't get worse for the Raiders offense. I mean, potentially losing Jeanty now, right? Brock Bowers has missed time this year. Jacoby Myers traded away. I think Michael Mayer got injured this past week. Geno Smith looks completely lost. It makes sense that we're at the Zamir White portion of the season now here for Vegas. So, all right, Dylan Sampson, he remains on the list, Nate. We've talked about him plenty, but Quinshon Judkins looked a little banged up this past week. Sampson scored a long touchdown and even led the team in receiving yards this past week.
Yeah. In the first 3 quarters, everything was pretty normal for the Browns. It was Judkins as the top running back, Sampson as the backup. Jerome Ford has regained his third down role with Cleveland, so that doesn't leave a lot of opportunities for Sampson. But in the fourth quarter, it was kind of a constant update of Judkins going to the medical tent, returning from the medical tent, going back to the medical tent. Haven't had a ton of clarity of what those injuries were or what his status is right now. It seems like things are relatively fine. I think it'll be pretty telling what happens on the injury report tomorrow. So we'll see if there's a really high reason to pick up Sampson or if this is just a handcuff option. But the Browns do have a pretty solid schedule for running backs over the next 4 weeks. So if Judkins does miss any time there, Sampson has played well this season anytime he's been given an opportunity. A big thing with him is he catches a lot of passes when he's on the field. So that really helps his PPR value as well. So this is only if Judkins ends up missing time. But I think at this point of the season, when there's only 4 teams left on bye weeks, no teams have a bye week this week, your bench spot should be these high upside players who could have a really good game if something goes right, rather than some of these players who you just want as a bye week fill-in, but there's not much opportunity for their fantasy value to grow. So Sampson is someone that I think is perfectly fine to stash on your bench for now, just in case Judkins suffers an injury, because like if you have a good quarterback and your quarterback doesn't have a bye week anymore, you might not need your backup anymore. Same with your tight ends. Maybe you're strong at wide receiver and you don't need those backup wide receivers anymore. I would really rethink who all is on your bench and why they're on your bench. And these are the kind of players you should be looking to pick up.
Yeah, for sure. And there is only one more week here of bye weeks, which is not week 13, but week 14. There'll be four teams closing out all the bye weeks here. And yeah, passing down role for Sampson, it has been nice for him. We'll continue to see how Shedeur Sanders does as a starter. Obviously he won the game, but mostly thanks to the defense, let's be honest. But yeah, 11 passes completed there for Shedeur. But there were, flashes of hope, even if it wasn't the most encouraging performance for an offensive turnaround. But we'll see. Sampson has at least a decent enough role there, potentially a larger one if something happens to Quinshon Judkins. Okay, on to the next one, which of course is Tyler the Vulture Algier. Vulture. Although Bijan did at least take both of the team's red zone carries this past week. So we'll see. But maybe the world is healing. But the season as a whole, Algier has had a pretty significant role for the Falcons.
Oh, yeah, it's not surprising that he has had a bigger role anytime the Falcons have been winning games and hasn't had as big of a role anytime they're losing games. Averages 13.5 carries and 50 yards in their wins and 5 carries and 17 yards in their losses. So you want Algier potentially in your lineup if you're a little more desperate in games where the Falcons are favored to win. You don't want anything to do with him if they're losing. Of course, he also is one of the top handcuff options, but the big reason he's here right now is because the Falcons play the Jets this upcoming week. That's a game where I think the Falcons are capable of winning. The Jets' run defense has been playing fairly well recently, even though they made the trades they made at the trade deadline, still limiting yards per carry from running backs. But the big thing is Algier, as long as the Falcons are winning, should see that volume, and volume might be what you need this week. So, there's other running backs who a lot of it's dependent on injuries. And then there's Chris Rodriguez. But if you're looking for a running back this week that is going to get a decent number of carries, Algier is an option.
Yeah, there you go. At least a matchup-based option, Tyler Algier. And then next up, Nate, is Byshol Tootin of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who was getting a surprisingly amount of hype heading into this past week, considering that Travis Etienne was still active and has been a big part of the Jags offense. I understand we all had some hope for Tootin coming into the year. I know he was heavily involved in week 11, but yeah, Etienne doesn't seem like he's going anywhere at this point, barring an injury. Probably wasn't going to be a high-end play, Tootin, but there's definitely a role there. It's just, again, it's about expectations, right, Nate?
Both running backs were limited in practice all week heading into the week. I think Tootin's injury was a little bit more significant, which led to Etienne playing even more than usual this past week, even though there's been a lot of good things said about Tootin, and he had the good game the 2 weeks ago. But the big thing that leads them to be on the list this week is they face the Tennessee Titans this week, a game where Jacksonville could be running the ball a lot throughout the game. That means there could be enough volume for both running backs. And we saw 2 weeks ago that Tootin had the hot hand and they were willing to give him the ball even more. So if Tootin gets the hot hand this week, he could have a really big week again. But most likely, I would expect him to get around 7 to 8 carries. So that's still better than most other backup running backs who are available on the waiver wire. So if you need a running back for this week and are in a little bit of a tougher spot, I think the fact that they're playing Tennessee and could be running the ball a lot could lead to an okay game by Tootin. In general, I think he has the more upside of the two with him and Tyler Algier this week, because if he gets a hot hand, we know he can get more volume, and the matchup means he could have an even better game compared to the Jets, who have been playing decently well. But there is also a much better chance Algier reaches those double-digit carries, where Tootin, in an average case, will probably get those 7 to 8 carries this week.
Yeah, I like Tootin. We liked him this offseason as well and around draft time. But yeah, Etienne has been playing really well and obviously has a substantial role there. Doesn't seem to be going anywhere. But like you said, there's opportunity in games where they're winning for sure and have the opportunity to run the ball a little bit more. So, all right, last running back on the list is Bengals handcuff Samaje Perine. He's missed the last 2 games, but we're holding him here more in case something were to happen to Chase Brown anyways.
We did see him get more opportunities prior to his injury, so that was good to see. He was running the ball more, and he was very effective on his runs, so that's been good to see. It's also was good to see the injury report yesterday. He was a full participant in practice on Monday, which is a pretty good sign that he should be playing in the game on Thursday. So good to see him back from injury. Taj Brooks, their other backup running back, suffered a concussion, so it seems unlikely he is going to play this week. So I would expect Samaje to be back in his usual role. So that will be great. And the big thing is they face some tough opponents. They face the Ravens twice, including this week. They face the Buffalo Bills. So 3 games where I wouldn't be surprised if Samaje is on the field a lot, because they will probably be playing from behind, needing to pass the ball to catch up. He'll be on the field. He'll be catching passes. He'll be running the ball some in there. So especially in those deeper leagues, if you need a running back, I think he can be an option in those 14 or 16 team leagues because of the matchups and because of how well he was playing before his injury. And like those past couple weeks, Chase Brown has been playing a very high percentage of the offensive snaps, especially on a short week. He might need a little bit more of a break this week. So we might see more of Samaje specifically this week because it's a short week and how much Brown has been playing. So primarily, if Brown suffers an injury, that would be huge for Samaje, but he can also have some value in these 14 or 16 team leagues based on the situation and how he was playing.
For sure. All right, before we go into the wide receivers, I want to let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high-pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if we've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that can have a meaningful impact on your kids' future. Opening a UGMA Kids Investment Account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account can take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees, just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, wide receiver time now, Nate. Led by New England Patriots wide receiver Kayshon Boutte. He's been banged up and missed a couple of games, but was back in the lineup this past week and resumed his starting role.
Yeah, not just resumed it, but he was seeing even more playing time than usual. It seemed like New England, who over the start of the season was in a big rotation of wide receivers, seemed to be a bit more settled with Kayshon and Mac Hollins being their 2 receivers, with Stephon Diggs joining them in 3 wide receiver sets, Demario Douglas mixing in a little bit in 3 wide receiver sets, and Kyle Williams really wasn't seeing the field that much. So it was good to see his playing time be fairly high this week and look pretty similar to a normal wide receiver. Did not have much production, but it's worth noting they were facing the Bengals, who, even though they've allowed a lot in the passing game in general, have not allowed a ton in terms of deep passes to wide receivers this season. And that's where Kayshon has thrived as a wide receiver. Next week facing the New York Giants, who have given up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, but also the 3rd most yards on deep passes to wide receivers, 571 over the first 11 weeks on deep passes to wide receivers. So this is a much better matchup for him. So good to see not just his playing time increase, but also have a pretty good matchup this week. So if you need a wide receiver specifically this week, I think he's the best option, but also just being the top outside option for a very great offense so far this season, who has a good schedule in general. He is also a fine rest of season option.
Yeah, like you said, it might be a matchup-based option on some weeks, but like you pointed out, this is at least a favorable matchup against the Giants, who just recently had to fire their defensive coordinator. So might be a good week to put that Boutte to work. Okay, on to more serious news. T. Higgins suffered a concussion this week and has already been ruled out for Thursday. So Andre Yoshivas should have a decent-sized role again, with Joe Burrow back under center most likely as well.
Yeah, Jamar Chase had a suspension last week, so we saw him in a bigger role this past week. Saw more he was on the field for a higher percentage of the Bengals passing plays, which was good to see, was targeted on a higher percentage of his routes, which is even more important. So caught 4 passes for 61 yards against the Patriots. Interesting matchup this week against the Ravens. Again, should be the number 2 wide receiver. So I think it's an opportunity for him to have another decent game. And like you said, change that quarterback, which should be helpful for him. So I think this is, again, a week where he should be able to put up at least wide receiver 3 production. So again, if you need a wide receiver this week and Booty isn't available, since Andre is available in a higher percentage of leagues, he is another option specifically for this week.
Yeah, team's leading wide receiver this past week, 61 yards. And I'm sure Joe Burrow is going to look to feed Jamar Chase as well. But Yoshivas should absolutely be involved there with T. Higgins out. And yeah, it's maybe not the easiest matchup against an improved Ravens defense. However, Kyle Hamilton got banged up this past week, and he's been obviously a major key to that defense's improved play in recent weeks as they've been able to play 3 safeties. So he's at risk of missing this game on a short week. So the Ravens might not be able to play their preferred defense this week, which would help the Bengals offense quite a bit for what it's worth. Okay, Chimere DK, he has been electric as a kick returner this year, so can't imagine he's available in leagues that reward kick and punt returns anymore, but his role on offense has grown as well as injuries have opened the door a bit more, Nate.
Oh, yeah, Calvin Ridley is out for the season, so that's big. And then this past week, Alec Ayumnor was also out, so DK saw a larger role in the offense in general. He's been able to perform in 3 of the past 5 weeks, which is good to see, but the other 2 weeks, he didn't really have much in terms of receiving production. Has averaged 13.1 PPR points since week 7, which ranks second among the wide receivers who are available on the waiver wire, just behind Parker Washington, but I'm concerned about Washington once Brian Thomas Jr. returns, which sounds like will be happening this week, where DK, I think, will have a large role in the Titans offense for the rest of the season. So anytime you can get a team's number 1 wide receiver at this point of the season, especially when they're a rookie, I think it makes sense to do so. I can understand hesitation in putting him in fantasy starting lineups because he did have those 2 games where he caught a combined 3 passes for 19 yards. So there is that risk that he might not do much, but I think as the team's top receiver, he should have more good games than not over the rest of the season.
Yeah, and for what it's worth too, like it was also Cam Ward's best game of the year, 74.7 passing grade for him against a good Seattle team. No turnover worthy plays for only the second time this season for Cam Ward, 256 passing yards. That was the 3rd most for him. So there's maybe some hope that, the passing offense can get better if Cam Ward starts to improve and string a few games together here. All right. So, okay, I know it's American Thanksgiving, but how about some love to our Canadian friends like John Mechie, wide receiver 1 for the New York Jets right now, Nate?
Yeah, it appears he is the wide receiver 1. New York had Garrett Wilson, who's on injured reserve, Josh Reynolds, who's on injured reserve. Arian Smith hasn't done much this season. Tyler Johnson and Alan Lazard, it seems like they're switching up which one of the 2 is inactive every other week. So it's been the wide receivers that they recently traded for that have moved to the top of the depth chart. Mechie's playing time has increased each week. Now his playing time is that of a normal starting wide receiver. Adonai Mitchell also saw an increase in snaps this week, was the other starting wide receiver for the Jets. But it's been Mechie that's been more consistent in the passing game. They've been pretty similar in terms of total number of targets, but Mitchell hasn't been catching many of his targets, where Mechie has consistently been catching his targets. Had the best day of the group this past week, 6 receptions, 65 yards and a touchdown. Scored a touchdown last week as well. The Jets' schedule is only average for wide receivers, but he is the top wide receiver on an NFL offense, and those are typically hard to come by on the waiver wire in fantasy. So Mechie has a chance to continue to be pretty productive, see a number of targets each week, make a number of catches. Probably not going to score a touchdown every week, but he should still be a decent wide receiver 3 option, especially if you've been dealing with injuries at the position.
Love it. Yeah. We definitely need more Canadian representation on the list and in the league. And then the Jets can definitely use some wide receiver help. So maybe, just maybe, Mechie can be a consistent option in the passing game for the Jets and for fantasy for us here. So I'd like to see that. All right, a couple rookie wide receivers to close us out here, starting with Jaden Higgins of the Houston Texans, whose role continues to improve.
Yeah, it has improved slowly but surely. I'm sitting at 57% of snaps in each of the past three games, consistently playing. Uh, he was consistently playing less than 50% when Nico Collins was healthy, but that has changed these past couple weeks. Seeing more playing time in three wide receiver sets. This past week, they were just using more two tight end sets in general or 21 personnel, and that's when Higgins is often on the field. So that helped him this past week. Has had a high target rate when he is on the field, has been performing well on his targets. The big thing is we need him to see that increase in role in order to really be comfortable putting him in fantasy starting lineups. And we keep hoping it happens each week, and we haven't had that big leap happen yet. I still want him on the bench in my fantasy leagues just in case that leap happens, in which case I'd be happy to put him in my fantasy starting lineups. But there's also a chance that that doesn't happen this season. But again, I would rather take a chance on a rookie on my bench who could have a bigger role and has been playing well than some of these other veteran players who are just going to sit on my bench and are only there in case one of my starters suffers an injury.
Yeah, for sure. And like, look, we've been saying is at least 7 targets in each of the past 3 games. Now had 9 this past week. Scored his 4th touchdown of the year as well on Thursday. So nice. Again, like little incremental improvements here for Jaden Higgins. So, like you said, maybe not this year because it's taking a while to take that big jump, but at least seeing him involved here, and definitely not impossible that he continues to just get more involved before the year closes out. And then lastly, the third installment of the Luther Burden trilogy rounds out our wide receiver list of waiver targets this week, Nate.
Oh, yeah, pretty similar where he has been playing well. His playing time has been on the rise, just not quite enough to put him in fantasy starting lineups yet. He played over 50% of snaps for the first time this season this past week, so that was really good to see. But he didn't see as much time in 11 personnel as he did the previous week, which was a little concerning. He pretty well was consistently the slot receiver in three wide receiver sets 2 weeks ago. Only played 61% of 11 personnel snaps this past week, but was playing more in one wide receiver sets, playing more in two wide receiver sets. So that was good to see at least. The three wide receivers all gained between 46 and 64 receiving yards this week. So the targets have been pretty well spread out among the Bears wide receivers. I think that'll continue to happen, which will make it harder to trust any of the wide receivers in Chicago, especially if Burden's playing time keeps rising. But he's, again, someone who is seeing an okay amount of playing time and is playing well on it. Ideally, he continues to see more playing time, in which case, have him on your bench. And if he has that big breakout week, then you can start putting him in your fantasy starting lineup.
Yep, he's in there. He's run at least 20 routes in each of the past 3 games, getting some targets, getting a little bit of, he's getting some carries too. I think he had a carry this week. So yeah, getting involved, just not quite enough to be a fantasy starter yet, but that could absolutely come here. Okay, on to the tight ends now. And where we left off in Chicago at wide receiver, we'll pick back up in Chicago to kick off the tight ends, led by Colston Loveland once again, Nate.
Yeah, another Bears rookie that isn't quite seeing the ideal amount of playing time, but that can be a bit more forgiving as a tight end compared to wide receivers because he is often on the field on passing plays at the very least, which is good to see compared to Cole Kmet, who is seeing a lot of playing time, but playing more in run situations. And Loveland has been more consistent in terms of his targets each week, has been catching at least 4 passes these past couple games, gained at least 40 receiving yards in each of the past 4 outings. And in terms of the past 6 weeks, he ranks among the top fantasy tight ends in terms of production. A lot of that came in that one game where he had the 6 receptions for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns, which will really help your fantasy value over the course of a couple games at least. But he's still been among the top fantasy tight ends and therefore should be taken off the waiver wire as someone who has been considered a low or high end tight end too. But the more that he continues to get at least 40 receiving yards, the closer he is going to be to that tight end 1 status. Probably should be at the borderline of tight end 1, tight end 2 this week. Has a rough matchup against Philadelphia, so I understand if you don't want him in your fantasy starting lineup this week, but their schedule is pretty favorable over the rest of the season, so I could see him being a starting fantasy tight end throughout the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, look, obviously frustrating, that he's sharing snaps with Cole Kmet, but if he wasn't, he'd probably be rostered across the board, right? And there's at least a chance that that he does get that full-time role if something were to happen to Cole Kmet in the next couple of weeks. That sounded like a threat, but no, I'm just saying as a possibility that Loveland's role could grow here if something were to happen to Komet. Okay, Darren Waller, he remains on the list. We're waiting his return from injured reserve, and it sounds like he's going to have his practice window opened this week at the very least. Nate.
Oh, yes, that was a big piece of positive news, finding that he should come back to practice this week. It's probably 50-50-ish if that means he plays this week. We've seen plenty of players return to practice and need another week or two. Plenty of players return to practice and they're ready to return right away. So that's good news for Waller. Gives him time to ramp up his playing time. We saw when he was playing early in the season, he had a small role in his first game back, and that role was increasing each and every week. The week that he was injured, he was playing a very high percentage of the offensive snaps before the injury. So it was at least Miami's plan at the time to make him pretty much a full-time tight end for the team, which was great to see. And from weeks 4 to 6 before the injury was averaging 15.2 PPR points per game. So that is excellent for a fantasy tight end. I wouldn't start him this week if he is playing this week. I'd wait to see what happens. But the big thing is in the fantasy playoffs, faces the Pittsburgh Steelers, faces the Cincinnati Bengals, the two of the worst 6 teams at preventing fantasy points to tight ends this season. The Bengals in particular, they've allowed a couple more fantasy points to tight ends than any other team this season. We've seen plenty of average tight ends have huge weeks against them. Hunter Henry this past week had a huge game. So Waller, I think, can be in fantasy starting lineups during the fantasy playoffs and have the potential to have some pretty big games in the playoffs if he is healthy.
Nice. All right. And then Brenton Strange did return off injured reserve this past week, and he actually led the Jaguars in receiving yards with 5 catches for 93 yards. So regaining his starting role in that offense where we've seen him be productive before.
Yeah, his playing time wasn't quite where it was before the injury, but that's understandable considering how much time he missed. Would not be at all surprised if his playing time was back to normal this upcoming week. Had that good game with the 93 yards, still hasn't scored a touchdown this season, so hopefully he's able to do that at some point in these next couple weeks. But I think he is someone who probably should be considered a high-end tight end too over the rest of the season. If you have a tight end that you're happy with, you probably don't need Strange, but if you've been struggling at tight end and particularly need one for the short term where some of the other tight ends I mentioned, a little bit better options in the fantasy playoffs, Strange is someone who can be in fantasy starting lineups, and there are much worse options out there. I think Strange has a high floor relative to a lot of other tight ends and has a decent enough ceiling.
Nice. I like that. All right. Another player who returned off injured reserve, Mike Gesicki, came back and he finished second on the team in receiving yards this past week. With T. Higgins out in week 13, there might be room for more Gesicki involvement this week.
Yeah, the Bengals are a team that likes to use a ton of 11 personnel, but with the wide receiver, first the suspension, now the injury, should see a lot more 12 personnel. We saw that increase in 12 personnel this past week, which was good to see. Expect to see that again this week. And we saw those splits last year where when T. Higgins was injured, Gesicki averaged 5.2 receptions, 62 receiving yards per game over those 5 weeks. So would not be at all surprised if Gesicki is heavily involved this week with Higgins out. So if you need a tight end specifically for this week, the Ravens aren't the best matchup for tight ends typically, but still I expect him to see volume, and that's what you care about the most for tight ends.
For sure. And then lastly, Taysom Hill went and led the Saints in carries this past week. Also had a couple throws in there because why not? That's what Taysom Hill does. So with Alvin Kamara potentially out, we could get to see some more Taysom usage, Nate.
Oh, yeah, he is a very risky tight end to play because he's not really running a ton of routes, not seeing a ton of targets. So this is almost completely rushing production that you would expect from him. Would not be at all surprised for him to get close to 10 carries again going forward. But he hasn't been all that productive on his runs. The big thing is they do like to use him near the goal line. So he has that possibility to score touchdowns. So I think if you are a team that's desperate to make the playoffs, needs a lot of points for tiebreaker purposes, are underdogs in your games, I think Hill is kind of the perfect tight end to consider there because his upside is probably higher than the other tight ends we've talked about because he could easily score 2 rushing touchdowns in a game along with getting 50 yards or so. So that's a lot more fantasy points than you get from a tight end typically. So Hill is someone that if you're an underdog, go for him. If you have already made the fantasy playoffs or if you're favorites to win a game or aren't willing to take those risks, then I wouldn't consider Hill. But it just depends what your fantasy team needs and how desperate you are for those fantasy points. But he does have that nice high end upside to go along with that risk.
Yeah, for sure. Always risky, but yeah, if Alvin Kamara misses time, then he absolutely becomes more interesting, right? Like, especially like you said, around the goal line, where they love to use him, and maybe he does punch in a couple of touchdowns for you. That would be obviously huge, and he would probably get that usage. So Taysom Hill still out there in a lot of leagues. But that's it for this week. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. Good luck attacking the waiver wires this week. Thank you, as always, to the PFF data collection team, the best team in the multiverse here at PFF, where all this data is powered from. And again, if you want to get access to anything that we write on the site or any of the player grades and data and snap counts, all that stuff, you can do so with a PFF Plus subscription using the code Black Friday for 40% off. I believe it's just for this week. And again, it's the biggest sale of the year that'll get you access for an entire year. So make sure you use that promo code and save doing so. And Nate, as far as stuff that you've written on and are writing on the website this week, what do you got for people who are interested?
Sure. So we have the recap articles all up on the website. We have the usage and production report where I go through my top takeaways. A lot of interesting things this week of players seeing their most playing time that they have all season. So good news for a couple of players heading into the fantasy playoffs, as well as a ton of stats, at least 10 tables worth of stats for each player, each team, each position. That's all filterable, sortable, and all those fun things. So check that out if you haven't already. Have the waiver wire article, have the rankings up, the rest of season rankings, dynasty rankings will be going up tomorrow. No more 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high now that we have passed the trade deadline in the majority of fantasy leagues. But we'll have start sit up on Thursday as usual, even though it's Thanksgiving. We'll have the recaps for the Thursday games. Reminder that we have the 3 games on Thursday. We also have the 1 game on Friday this week. So make sure you're taking that into account when you're setting your lineups. But we'll have recaps to all of those. We'll make sure the rankings are up to date for all of those. And then we'll do everything again next week.
Beautiful. Love it. And then, as for me, the IDP fantasy report, that's out now. That'll be updated with the Monday Night Football players as well. You get all your snap shares for all your IDPs, waiver targets on defense, and a lot more in there. IDP rankings will be out, wide receiver man zone coverage report, the red zone report, all that stuff will be out on the site this week. Again, get access to all of it with the promo code Black Friday to get 40% off a PFF Plus subscription. I will be back in the podcast feed for IDP start sit. Probably going to try to get that out Wednesday night. It usually comes out Thursday morning, but I understand that not anybody is going to choose listening to me over watching Thursday night football game or Thursday football game. So we'll try to get that out as early as possible since we'll cover some of the Thursday stuff in there. But good luck to everybody in week 13. Hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving in the US. And until next time, peace out.